Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where the animation industry just got even more competitive. Yes, Jeffrey Katzenberg is having another bad day, as Warner Brothers Animation announced they're taking one of their biggest guns from over on Cartoon Network, which they own, and bringing it to the silver screen, and that is Adventure Time. I wish it was the Venture Brothers, but I think Adventure Time is a much more ambitious and mainstream property, which could potentially be a huge hit for them. It's a very aggressive move, both externally and internally, as we'll discuss, but let's first talk about the external ramifications. I think it clearly shows Warner Brothers Animation is here to stay and has every intention of not just holding on to the territory they've managed to capture thanks to the success of the Lego Movie, but they want to expand their hold on the animation audience, which, by the way, is already very much in demand. The animation slate is incredibly crowded, to the point where DreamWorks recently had to say, we're going to go back from 3 movies a year to 2 because we just can't, not only can we not apparently support 3 movies a year, but there isn't enough of an audience to go around. But that's not stopping Warner Brothers Animation, which is going to be quite prolific. And I think to some degree, people might have expected them just to be in the Lego movie business for some time because of all the movies they've announced with that franchise. But no, they are going to be very busy indeed, and they apparently feel they can handle the workload, both in terms of production and getting an audience to show up. Because of course, don't forget, there's the Lego movie sequel, there's a Ninjago movie, and there's a Lego Batman movie spin-off with Will Arnett, etc. And of course, the Lego movie people are king right now. They really have the keys to Warner Brothers Animation Kingdom, as you're going to find out, because they're very heavily involved in the Adventure Time movie. That's a little bit what I'm talking about with the internal aggressiveness that's going on at Warner Brothers Animation. But I think it's important to note just how cutthroat animation is becoming as a whole as a business. There's so much money on the table, and whenever there's a lot of money at play, people can become very aggressive, and decisions are taken away from most people and really left only to upper management because they're like, look, there's a lot of money at stake here. I don't necessarily trust you with the decision. I think you've seen that happen a little bit with comic books as well. There's so much money on the table, a lot of the decision making has been taken out of the hands of the people who actually make the comic books, with the movie people going, hey look, I was fine with you guys deciding this when you were just comic books, but now that movies are at stake and theme park attractions, etc., and merchandising at that level, well, you know what, we'll give you the marching orders because we're going to decide that up here with the higher ups. So you're seeing that happen a little bit with animation, very interesting. And then of course, even with the Oscar, we still have that controversy brewing about Big Hero 6 picking up the win, and that's because you have people voting on the animation Oscar who, have really very little invested in the winner, both professionally or emotionally. It's just kind of like, what are my kids or kids I know watching, right? It's really a shame that that's happened, but even though the Annie Awards might be a little more indicative of what people professionally feel deserves the recognition, an Oscar is still an Oscar. So I think the animation industry is very much coming into its own. I think now everybody's at the table. I think almost every studio now has a seat, and it'll be interesting to see how this develops over the next couple of years. So how is the Adventure Time movie developing? Well, this is a very smart choice. Again, I said it has a very strong mainstream audience, and if you've ever been to a comic book convention, you can see that the fans for Adventure Time are legion. This is a very, very, very strong fan base, cultivated quite brilliantly by the show, the creators of the show. And I think it's one of the strongest non-comic book fan bases in that still same area. I'm talking about comic book conventions. That's probably up there with, let's say, My Little Pony. And of course, My Little Pony is also going to become a movie soon, which Hasbro Animation, through their AllSpark Pictures, is going to actually make themselves because they feel no one else has the correct amount of enthusiasm for it in other studios, because it's somewhat of a female-centric brand, but then just ask any brownie and they'll tell you that's not true. So Adventure Time, very strong fan base, and I can see why Warner Brothers Animation wants to move forward with it. But they've done something very interesting. They've taken the brand and the characters, and I guess they feel that the people making the show will continue to be busy making the show, but they're putting Lego people onto the creative of the film. Pendleton Ward has been said will have some, quote-unquote, some involvement in the writing and producing, but the reins have really been handed over to Chris McKay, who's from the Robot Chicken team. He's not one of the original, creative founders of that show, but he's a part of that team. and Roy Lee are taking over the Adventure Time movie. Chris McKay, you'll be hearing his name a lot because he's also going to direct the Lego Batman movie with Will Arnett. He's been given that job. And Lee helped produce the first Lego movie. So they really feel that these guys know what they're doing. And so far, they've proven that they have. They've only proven so once, so we'll see how they do a second time. But, you can understand, I think, somewhat the logical thinking here. However, I'm curious to know, and I'm sure many of you are as well, if they're going to take the logic, the formula that they use with the Lego Movie brand and apply it to Adventure Time. Is Adventure Time going to become more self-aware? Will the more adult subtext, of the show, such as I believe it's hinted at there's a nuclear fallout or a nuclear war, and that's how Adventure Time is built on the ashes of that. There's some dark stuff going on there, which is very clever from the show's creators, of course, because it loops in an older, more sophisticated audience at the same time. But perhaps, considering how important it is for animated movies to appeal to adults these days, you might see that come more to the forefront. Will McKay and Lee just be totally 100% faithful to what Ward has created, or will they try to expand and grow upon it? It's a big question in terms of creative ownership. We just had it last week with the Power Rangers fan film. Who is totally in charge of something? And I think for Adventure Time to get to this next level, you are seeing it start to go through those growing pains. And we'll see if it comes out on the other side. But I think this will certainly help the television show, and it will also help the comics. Adventure Time is quite the empire at this point. So it's a very interesting situation, and it's a level of growth, again, that I said is necessary from a business perspective. Pendleton Ward is involved, but it's curious to see properties advancing like this. And if you can recast, let's say, James Bond, can you do the same kind of research with the creative team behind a property? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is something that comic book fans have been dealing with for quite some time, for instance, with different writers on our favorite characters, right? Some writers get Batman, some don't. And some get them but aren't recognized for, how well in tune they are with the characters, and some have celebrated runs even though they've actually done some harm to the character. So it's a very big discussion, and as we become Hollywood becomes more franchise-based as well, you're going to see that same thing happening. Usually for a very long time, properties were, most they got was a trilogy. But as they continue for more than 3 movies, sometimes far more than 3, you have a situation where multiple creative people need to be brought in succession to keep a property alive. And, I think the big thing at the end of the day is, do they each bring their own unique voice to it, or do they honor the core of the idea? I think it's a mix, obviously, but it'll be interesting to see Adventure Time go through this evolution. So I'm curious to what you guys think. Adventure Time fans, are you excited about getting a movie? What do you think of the change of creative a little bit, or I guess you could say additional creative added on with Pendleton Ward? And what do you think of how, creative properties, were wrestling with new questions, not in animation, but then also, in live action? And then finally, I think the other big question here is, what do you think how cutthroat the animation business is becoming? I think this is perhaps the last bastion of artistry, pure artistry in Hollywood, and I think that it has become part of the machine like everything else. That's not to say good creative can't be done, but there are also other things at play, as we discussed. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, talking about politics and things being at play, Leonardo DiCaprio has not given up his quest for an Oscar. And he actually has a project finally moving forward, which he's been circling for 20 years. But he's finally brought some screenwriters on board. They're not the best screenwriters. I don't understand, again, why Leonardo DiCaprio, he is Leonardo DiCaprio. He can put together a great film, not only star in one, but produce one. Of course, with Scorsese, with Wolf of Wall Street, he was a producer on that film. But, we'll see how this comes together. But it's a very interesting property, so I'm going to tell you about it. See if you're curious. I'm curious to know if you think this is like a really strong Oscar contender for Leonardo DiCaprio finally, or do you think, once again, he's a little too desperate, it's a little too much of Oscar bait, etc. All right, so he wants to tell the story of Billy Milligan, a real-life individual in the 1970s who became the first person to ever successfully argue the insanity plea and be acquitted. He wasn't acquitted. He wasn't free to go. He had, of course, had to go to mental institutions where he was there for 10 years after his trial. But at the same time, he didn't have to go to jail. He wasn't incarcerated. I think, as many people have explored in many movies, a mental institution is sometimes a more ideal place to go than a prison. However, then you see movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, etc., and you can see that mental institutions are no picnic either. But Billy Milligan decided that's where he wanted to go. So it took place in the 1970s, and also I wonder if this will explore whether or not he's legitimately insane, or if this just opened the door to this insanity plea that so many people have tried to use, some successfully, some not successfully. So Billy Milligan was arrested in the 1970s again for robbery and also kidnappings and rape, which he did several times. But he argued that he had a multiple personality disorder, and there was actually a female doctor who interviewed him and diagnosed him. So I think that could also be a very interesting role in the movie, and DiCaprio better watch out, because that sounds like the kind of role that could swoop in and give an actress a nomination, and she could steal his Oscar thunder. So we'll see how that develops. But he said that he had, in the book and the way the movie's being pitched, he had 3 personalities, and they were actually the ones responsible for the crime, and he was unaware that he had committed these crimes. And so the courts decided that that was the correct situation and put him into mental care institutions where, again, he was there for a decade before he was released. Now, the 3 personalities are Adelana, a lesbian, a teenage lesbian who admitted that she was the one responsible for the rapes, Ragan, a Yugoslavian communist who committed the robbery, trying to be like a Robin Hood, and then Arthur, an uptight Englishman who apparently couldn't stop them. They don't really say what he is doing there in the mix. Now, of course, as you can see, the way this project is coming together, DiCaprio will have to depict these different personalities. And I think that's another big question mark. I think DiCaprio is a wonderful actor, but I think we can all admit that he's never really played anything but variations of himself, which is kind of the criteria for being a movie star. You do one thing and you do it quite well, and you find different scripts that play to that, your strength. And so I don't think DiCaprio has ever really established himself as a chameleon. So he's a very good actor, though, if you've ever seen What's Eating Gilbert Grape. He's very, very talented. But, this is going to require quite some effort to convincingly portray these different personalities. Unless they're going to take the route that this female doctor was tricked and this was all just some kind of, tricked big elaborate plan to get out of going to prison, and then that could be an interesting thing to play. That to me seems more like something that's in DiCaprio's wheelhouse. But if this person is legitimately insane, this seems something more like you need a Daniel Day-Lewis or an Eddie Redmayne for, correct? I just don't quite see this fitting in with DiCaprio's strengths again as an actor. And then also I think it's very interesting, and I wonder if they'll look further into the fact that once Billy Milligan went to mental institutions, he went up to 14 personalities being discovered. So, is that just the depth of his sickness, or is that just someone, trying to make sure they stay in the mental institution? There are some really big questions at play here. It's a very sensitive subject. So we'll see how the film comes together, but I'm curious if Leonardo DiCaprio finally has found his Oscar project, or do you think, once again, he's just a little bit out of his depth? All right, so that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story, we're talking a lot about, politics and stuff today in the different stories. And I think Michelle Rodriguez finds herself in a similar situation where she really got herself into some hot water over the weekend. Now, I was going on Twitter, just checking it like I always do, and I was like, why is Michelle Rodriguez trending? So I clicked on it, and I immediately saw why. Well, TMZ cornered her, as they do so many celebrities these days, and they said, well, do you want to play Green Lantern? There's a rumor that you're going to be Green Lantern. Because apparently there is a female Latino version of Green Lantern that Michelle Rodriguez could conceivably play. Well, Michelle Rodriguez responded, and I want to have the exact quote here so I get it right, and this is what she said to TMZ, who posted it, and it created quite the blow-up on the internet. Michelle Rodriguez says, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard because of the whole minorities in Hollywood thing. It's so stupid. Stop stealing all the white people's superheroes. Make up your own." And of course, people got very upset about this. And I think Michelle Rodriguez, I think she was coming from a good place. We'll discuss that in a moment. But she did, have a rebuttal. She posted on her Facebook page saying, look, I just feel that we should create our own superheroes, our own mythology, instead of just, taking other people's or building on that. I think we deserve to have our own, heritage and mythology. And I think there's some merit to what she's saying. But there was a very good counter argument that was also put out over the weekend. And that's that she should realize that Hollywood is a town that really only believes and greenlights established properties. So it's very hard to create something new, if you can't point to sales in some other medium, be it comic books, television, books, etc. So it's very hard to create a superhero from scratch. And so I think it's hard I think that's the situation in many areas, not just Hollywood. I think they've seen a lot of people try to create diversity in the comics and it hasn't worked. But I think that this is a by the way, very complicated discussion. So I hope everybody will be very respectful in the comments down below. But, we talked about this with Deadshot, that I felt that this was one instance where I didn't want to see the character's ethnicity change with Will Smith. But then after seeing Focus and seeing what a good job he did there, I thought that, maybe this was a good match. So I think it really is, it's not so much about, tokenism. I think that's the problem. I think that's what Michelle Rodriguez is responding to. I think that tokenism is the problem. When you only make a change for the sake of change, in terms of both, not only ethnicity, but gender. This is something women deal with a lot too. Should there be a female James Bond? That's what Angelina Jolie tried to do with Salt. Should there be, why isn't there a female James Bond? Why isn't there a female Indiana Jones, right? We have all these discussions about changing the ethnicity of the character. Why not put a woman in there? And you're seeing that happen a little bit in comics with Batwoman and Thor. But I don't think those situations are working. I think the Batwoman character became more about her sexuality than about being a vigilante and a hero. I think that totally dominated the conversation about her as a character, which is why, and also she lost her very strong original creative team. But I think she became such a poster woman for gay characters in comics that robbed her, I think, of having her own identity. And then also with the new Lady Thor, the girl power is so heavy-handed in that series, I don't know if you're reading it right now, that, it's just so much about, oh, this is even with characters in the comics realizing, oh, this is an important step for women, that there's a Lady Thor. And Thor is still walking around. I think that's another important part. If you're going to make the replacement, you have to fully make the replacement. You can't have the other character anywhere, as there to remind people that, oh, well, this is the real version of it. And I think good examples of that are the way Miles Morales was created by fully replacing Peter Parker in that, Ultimate Universe in the comics, and that worked out very, very well. And there's some discussion about him being brought into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but he would be the only Spider-Man. There'd be no other Spider-Man there. I think that's important. That's an important distinction. And I think Jon Stewart came into his own when he was the only Green Lantern on Justice League Unlimited as an animated series. There wasn't any other Green Lantern hanging around. He was the Green Lantern. And therefore, there was a whole bunch of people who he became what they identified with Green Lantern. And I think that's why he has the fan base he has today. He's never ever been represented as well as he was in that animated series, because I think to some degree he's still just sidelined. It's just whenever he's brought in, it's tokenism, which is unfortunate. So I think that I can understand where Michelle Rodriguez is coming from. I think that she was insensitive to the business side of things and the frustration that people are experiencing there. But I feel the way I always do. If a character isn't working, that's when it's a good time to make a change. I think Peter Parker isn't working on the silver screen right now, which is why it might finally be time for Miles Morales. Perry White, a character that never really established himself with a personality. So I think that, changing it to Lawrence Fishburne was a great idea. I've been in favor of an Idris Elba James Bond, because it isn't tokenism there. When you see Idris Elba, you go, you have all the qualities of Bond, so why shouldn't you play him? And I think that's what Donald Glover was getting at with Spider-Man. I think he's like, I have a wiry frame, I'm comedic, I'm someone in the right age range of Andrew Garfield, why couldn't I play Spider-Man? If my skin color or my gender is the only thing keeping me from being that character, that's not a good enough reason. And that's why I think I finally came around on Will Smith on Deadshot, because I finally saw, him playing those character traits of Deadshot. It wasn't just, oh, well, let's give the role to Will Smith for, the sake of diversity or because he wants it. So again, a very complicated conversation, but I'm curious what you think of Michelle Rodriguez's thoughts, and what do you think of the larger conversation as a whole? It's one we're having a lot more these days, as more and more heroes are brought to the big screen, and more people in the audience want to see themselves represented up on that screen in a genre that they love so much. All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. Now, the viewer question comes from, yes, I am Groot, otherwise Alyssa. She says, so this is the second time she's asked it. So Alyssa, today I'm going to answer your question. Thank you so much for your patience. So she says, hi Grace, it's Alyssa again. You've answered my question twice. Excellent. I'm hoping to go for a 3rd time. You ask good questions, Alyssa. So she says, so this is my question. There are a lot of movies that have soundtracks that don't match up, flow well, or just don't add anything special to the movie and just fall flat. How do you know, or how can you make sure your soundtrack or score benefits your movie instead of taking away from it or being overshadowed by everything else? I hope you answer my question. Though I commented on this late. I was just talking about the video. Usually I say you have to comment in the first 48 hours or so. I've been watching your channel for almost a year now. I can hardly believe it, and I don't plan to stop anytime soon. Have a good day. As always, smiley face. Thank you, Alyssa. Great question, and I think something that a lot of people are interested in, especially because I think composers have become pretty well known these days. Not just the major ones, but second tier as well. But I want to talk about a special group of composers who have managed to really break out, and I think that's because they've allowed their music to break out. Now, of course, no matter what a composer does, they really need to make sure they're working with a director who cares about the contribution of the music to the overall composition of the film. Often, music is just there as a backdrop. It's there to, add excitement or get the job done. But there are other things that the director is focused on. For instance, take X-Men Days of Future Past or Edge of Tomorrow. I think you'd be hard-pressed to remember the music from that movie. Even as soon as you left the theater, you would be hard-pressed to identify it once more. Now, those are two very good movies that utilize music, I'm sure, quite well to add to the adrenaline of the film. But I think in those situations, you had filmmakers more concerned with, say, keeping track of all the X-Men characters, rebooting the timeline to fix all the prior mistakes, or over on Edge of Tomorrow, the different layers of, time loop that they were stuck in and making sure that all lined up, etc. And that's just, sometimes you just don't think about the music. It has to be a deliberate choice. And the way you do that is by either themes or by incorporating it very strongly into the context of the film. And by that, I usually mean editing. When you edit to a soundtrack, to the score, for instance, Hans Zimmer in Inception, or of course Bernard Herrmann's famous music for Psycho, when the music becomes a part of what the audience is experiencing viscerally, that's with editing, or I think editing is the best way to accentuate actually a musical score, then the audience becomes keenly aware of it. When it's not just playing in the background, when for instance you have long stretches in the film where there's no dialogue and you need the music to really uplift and fill in the blank, so to speak, literally. And that's when the audience makes an emotional connection to it. I also feel that it's very well done, let's say, with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Michael, I want to make sure I get his name right, Giacchino. Michael Giacchino did a fantastic job with that score, and he did a wonderful job layering in like a 1960s feel to pay homage to the origin of that franchise. And that was something that was very distinct and really, it stuck out. And the filmmaker, the director, has to agree to that and say, yes, when people are watching this scene, I'm okay with them saying, oh, hey, isn't that cool? You've incorporated the 1960s in there. You are, respectful of the origins of this franchise. Sometimes the director says, look, I just want them to focus on the apes. I don't want to take away from that. And, get that out of here. I have a really important dramatic moment going on with my actor, and I just want you to complement that. So again, it's a creative choice. And then also, I think the other way that a score can really stand out is a theme. And John Williams, of course, is the master of themes. And that's when you're creating big blockbuster franchises. You need something that just a few bars can immediately get the audience, it's almost a Pavlovian response to bring them in to the franchise and remind them of all the good times they've had. And like I said, John Williams, of course, is the master of that. Star Wars, Jaws, Spielberg, of course, that's a filmmaker. John Williams didn't just do that on his own. He worked with Steven Spielberg, who wanted that quality there. And I think that's very, very important. Of course, there's a Superman theme. These are all things that are immediately noticeable. And they have very strong connotations to them. Of course, Bryan Singer used that Superman theme again in Superman Returns, and it actually hindered the film because it had such strong, anchors to the audience to what Donner did that Singer just couldn't compare. So again, and that's one of the dangers of having such a strong score. So you can see that in that instance, Singer, it did not benefit him to focus so strongly on the music. So that's my answer to your question, Alyssa. I think it has to be a deliberate choice from the filmmakers. It has to be something they work together with the composer, and I think they have to allow the music to be a character in the story almost. It's accentuated either with periods of silence or editing, or big introductions where the theme plays, and over action sequences. Again, also that's another thing. And also, they have to agree with the composer to create a chord or a set of bars. I'm not a music person, I'm afraid, but something that in just a few short seconds is something that the audience instantly recognizes and has an emotional reaction to. All right, so I hope that answers your question. Thank you so much for asking. Everybody, thank you for tuning in today. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.